Imagine being like 2 years old.
Right. A toddler.
Yeah, exactly. You're in your bed, in your own home, fast asleep. And suddenly, in the dead of night, your doors are just thrown open.
Terrifying.
Completely. A procession of unfamiliar men in these elaborate robes, plus imperial guardsmen, they just march right into your nursery.
And they aren't there to negotiate either.
No, not at all. They declare that, by order of the government, you are being taken away.
Wow.
And as you scream and weep and, reach for your parents don't fight back.
Which is just so hard to fathom.
It really is. They don't hold on to you. They literally just stand there in total silence, watching you get dragged out into the dark.
Yeah.
And the reason they're taking you, they're going to lock you inside this massive walled palace and basically tell you that you are now a living god.
I mean, it sounds like the premise of a psychological horror film, honestly.
Right.
Or like a dark, inverted fairy tale where the prince isn't rescued from the tower, but he's, abducted and sealed inside of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. But this isn't fiction. This is the exact documented reality of Puyi, the last emperor of China.
Yeah.
So, welcome to our deep dive. We are embarking on something incredibly ambitious today.
We really are.
This is part 1 of a massive 9-part journey into one of history's most bizarre, surreal, and, ultimately tragic lives.
Definitely tragic.
For this first part, we're focusing squarely on Puyi's early years. And looking at the sources we've gathered, the historical texts, biographical excerpts, primary accounts, our mission isn't just to look at the timeline of how the Qing dynasty collapsed.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Way bigger. We want to understand the mechanics of this collapse through the eyes of a child and examine how a profoundly isolated, traumatizing upbringing forged the psyche of a boy who was given absolute power, yet lived as a total prisoner.
The stakes here are immense. I mean, we aren't just analyzing a family drama. We're looking at the rotting core of an empire that had ruled China since 1644.
Yeah, it's a huge span of history.
It is. We're going to observe its final gasping breath. And to understand the man Puyi became, we really have to understand the incredibly heavy, inescapable weight of the bloodline he was born into.
Right.
This was the absolute pinnacle of a crumbling system.
So let's start with those origins, because I'm looking at his family tree in these sources, and it is just a tangled web of sheer imperial weight.
It's extremely complicated.
Yeah. So Puyi is born on February 7, 1906 in Beijing. His father is Zaifeng, who holds the title of Prince Chun.
Yes.
And the lineage here is staggering. Like, his great-grandfather was the Daoguang Emperor, his great-uncle was the Xianfeng Emperor, his immediate predecessor on the throne was his own uncle, the Guangxu Emperor.
It's emperors all the way down, basically.
Literally. But I need you to help me untangle the mother's side, because the sources mention she came from the, let me get this right, the Manchu Plain White Banner clan.
The Guoge clan, yeah.
Right. What does that actually mean in the context of this society?
So to understand that, we have to look at how the Qing dynasty was structured. When the Manchu people conquered China back in the 17th century, they organized their military and society into what was called the 8 Banners system.
The 8 Banners.
Right. It was a way to structure the population for war and administration.
Yeah.
The banners were color-coded, and there was a very strict hierarchy.
Got it.
3 of those banners, the bordered yellow, the plain yellow, and the plain white, they were the upper 3 banners.
So they were the most important.
Exactly. They were under the direct personal command of the emperor himself.
Wow.
So when the texts say Puyi's mother, Yulan, was from the plain white banner, they're telling us she is from the absolute elite of the elite.
The top tier.
Yeah. This isn't just aristocracy. This is the inner circle of the imperial engine.
And it gets even more intense with her father. So Puyi's grandfather, a man named Ronglu. The sources describe him as essentially the military backbone of the empire at that time.
Ronglu was the ultimate power broker. I mean, he was a vital ally to the Empress Dowager Cixi, who was the true ruler behind the curtain.
Right. She was the one really pulling the strings.
Exactly. Ronglu held the titles of Minister of War and Chief Grand Counselor. And in 1895, he founded the Army of North China, which was at the time the most modernized, dominant military force in the country.
So this is serious military might.
Very serious.
Yeah.
So when Puyi's parents, Zaifeng and Yulan, are married in 1902, it is not a romance.
No, definitely.
It is a calculated merger. It marries the highest imperial bloodline with the highest military might.
So Puyi is essentially genetically engineered to be the perfect political asset.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Which brings us back to that terrifying night I mentioned at the beginning. It's November 13th, 1908. The current emperor, Guangxu, is dying without an heir.
Right.
And Empress Dowager Cixi, who is also nearing death herself, she makes her choice. She selects 2-year-old Puyi.
Yeah.
And this triggers that midnight raid on the northern mansion where Puyi's family lives.
The historical accounts of this event are just chilling in their bureaucratic coldness.
They really are.
The imperial officials arrive with a procession of eunuchs. There's no negotiation, there's no preparation at all.
Just a total ambush.
Basically, yeah. The decree is read, and the officials simply order the eunuch attendants to pick the toddler up and take him away to the Forbidden City.
And Puyi reacts the way literally any normal toddler would.
Of course.
He screams, he physically resists, he's weeping, shouting that he doesn't want to leave. They essentially have to force him into a palanquin.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
Yeah.
But the detail that I just cannot get past, the thing that defies every instinct we understand about family, is that his parents just stood by in silence.
Yeah, that's the part that sticks with you.
They watched their screaming son get carried off into the night and said nothing. The only person allowed to go with him was his wet nurse, Wang Lianshu.
Right.
I have to push back on this a bit. I mean, how is it possible for any parent, no matter how politically entrenched they are, to just stand there while their child is essentially kidnapped?
It is deeply disturbing, but we really have to contextualize the absolute terrifying power of the imperial court here.
Okay, lay it out for me.
We are looking at this through the lens of modern parenting, where, the family unit is sacred.
Right, where you protect your kid at all costs.
Exactly. But in the Qing dynasty, the emperor, and by extension the Empress Dowager, was the mandate of heaven made flesh.
Wow.
Their word was literal law. The parent's silence was not a lack of affection. It was a brutal, necessary survival mechanism.
So if they had fought back?
To resist a decree from Empress Dowager Cixi was treason. It meant execution.
Oh, wow.
And not just for the parents, but potentially the extermination of their entire extended family.
So they really had no choice.
The system demanded absolute, unquestioning submission. By staying silent, they were keeping themselves, and, ironically, keeping him alive.
It's a paralyzing situation. But if we shift the focus back to the 2-year-old, I mean, a 2-year-old doesn't understand political survival.
Not at all.
At that age, your parents are omnipotent. They are your entire shield against the world.
Right.
When his parents stood there helplessly, the psychological severance must have been instantaneous. The lesson he learns in that exact moment is that the people he trusts most in the world cannot protect him.
Exactly.
The world is violent and chaotic, and he is entirely alone.
That is a foundational trauma. It is the complete, abrupt shattering of safety. And the real tragedy is that this trauma isn't followed by comfort.
No, not even close.
He is taken directly into the terrifying machinery of imperial succession.
Right. Having been ripped from his home, he's transported into the massive labyrinthine walls of the Forbidden City and taken directly to see the woman who orchestrated this whole thing, Empress Dowager Cixi.
And remember, the state Cixi is in. She's at the very end of her life. She is actively dying.
Yeah, and Puyi's own recollection of this meeting is pure Gothic horror.
It really is.
He recalled being surrounded by strange adults and looking through this drab curtain to see what he described as an emaciated and terrifying, hideous face.
That's horrifying for a kid.
Right. He was so shocked and terrified by her appearance that he started trembling uncontrollably and burst into loud howls.
Yeah.
Cixi tried to have someone give him candied fruit to quiet him down, but he threw the sweets on the floor and just kept screaming, "I want Nanny, I want Nanny."
Which is, honestly, the most grounded, deeply human reaction a child could have in that scenario.
Yeah, totally.
He is clinging to the wet nurse, the only familiar anchor he has left in the world.
Exactly.
But look at Cixi's reaction.
Yeah.
She doesn't see a traumatized toddler. She is greatly displeased. She labels him a naughty child and coldly orders him to be taken away to play.
Naughty child. Unbelievable.
The complete absence of empathy from the adults in this system is just staggering.
It is. And then less than 2 days later, on November 15th, Cixi dies.
Yep.
So now, this traumatized, sobbing toddler is officially the Emperor of China.
It's absurd.
Which leads us to December 2nd, 1908, the day of his coronation in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. His father, Zaifeng, has been made Prince Regent, and he physically carries Puyi up onto the dragon throne.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the sensory overload of this moment because it just sounds unbearable for a 2-year-old.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Hall of Supreme Harmony is the symbolic center of the Chinese universe. The coronation is designed to be completely overwhelming. You have thousands of civil and military officials in full ceremonial dress dropping to their knees in synchronized kowtows.
Wow.
You have deafening ceremonial drums echoing off the stone courtyards, blaring horns, burning incense. It is an environment designed to project unshakable divine power.
And sitting at the absolute epicenter of all this grand, intimidating power is a toddler who is terrified out of his mind.
Exactly.
Puyi starts crying uncontrollably. He is thrashing around on the throne. He is completely ruining the great ceremony of enthronement. And his father, the Prince Regent, is kneeling beside him, unable to stop the ceremony, just desperately whispering into the boy's ear, "Don't cry, it'll be over soon. It'll be over soon."
It'll be over soon. I mean, it is such a tragic irony.
Right, because it's not over?
Because it won't be over.
Yeah.
He's being sentenced to a lifetime inside this golden cage.
Yeah.
When we analyze this scene, the contrast is just jarring. You have the rigid, ancient choreography of divine succession clashing violently with the pathetic reality of a terrified child.
I am really struggling to understand the psychology of the adults in the room here.
How so?
Well, how did the officials bowing before him rationalize this? You are looking at a weeping 2-year-old crying for his nanny, and you are collectively agreeing, yes, this child possesses absolute divine authority over millions of people.
Because the institution was entirely blind to human development.
Right.
To the officials, the child's emotional state was completely irrelevant. They didn't see a boy. They saw a vessel for the bloodline.
They just needed a symbol.
Exactly. The system didn't require a competent leader at that exact moment. It required a symbol to maintain the status quo.
That makes sense structurally, but man, it's brutal.
It is. But think about the psychological imprint this leaves on Puyi. His ascension to ultimate supremacy is inextricably linked to his moment of ultimate fear, vulnerability, and abandonment.
Wow.
He learns early on that his power does not stem from strength or ability. It stems from his own trauma.
He is a living god, but his very first experience of godhood is sheer panic.
Right.
Now, while this toddler is sequestered deep inside the Forbidden City, crying on the throne and being molded by eunuchs, the outside world is aggressively rejecting everything he represents.
Things are moving fast outside the walls.
The contrast is unbelievable. The empire is collapsing while the emperor is playing with toys.
The collapse happens rapidly. I mean, by October 10th, 1911, Puyi is just 5 years old.
Only 5.
Yeah. And the army garrison in the city of Wuhan mutinies. This isn't just an isolated riot either. It sparks a massive revolt that spreads like wildfire across the Yangtze River Valley.
The sources make a very specific point here that I want to highlight. They say the Chinese public decisively viewed the Qing dynasty as having lost the mandate of heaven.
Yes.
Before we get into the mechanics of the collapse, can you unpack that concept? What does losing the mandate of heaven actually mean in practical terms?
It is the foundational political philosophy of imperial China dating back thousands of years.
Okay.
The idea is that heaven grants an emperor the right to rule based on their virtue and their ability to govern well.
So it's conditional.
Exactly. It is not an unconditional right.
Okay.
If an emperor is despotic, or if the dynasty becomes hopelessly corrupt, which results in famine, poverty, and foreign invasions, all of which China was suffering at this time.
Right. Things were really bad.
Very bad. Then heaven withdraws its mandate. And here is the crucial part. The proof that the mandate has been lost is a successful rebellion.
Oh.
So when the public rises up and the military refuses to fight for the king, it is structurally viewed as cosmic validation that the dynasty's time is over.
That structural perspective is really vital. And I want to make it clear as we discuss this era, for you listening, we are looking purely at the mechanics of this historical collapse.
Right, absolutely.
The sources detail the fall of the King loyalists and the rise of the Republican revolutionaries. And we are observing these shifting tides completely impartially. We're just watching the architecture of a 268-year-old empire crack under pressure.
Precisely. We're just looking at the facts. And the fact is, the imperial court in Beijing panics.
Understandably.
In a desperate move to save themselves, they recall a strongman military general named Yuan Shikai to crush the revolution.
Right.
But the momentum of the uprising is just too immense. People simply will not bleed for the Qing dynasty anymore.
The tide has turned.
Yeah. Puyi's father, Prince Chun, recognizes the futility of it all and steps down as regent in December 1911. He just hands the mess over to Empress Dowager Longyu.
Which leads us to a date that changes global history. February 12, 1912.
A huge date.
Empress Dowager Longyu officially endorses the imperial edict of the abdication of the king-emperor. The dynasty is over.
Yeah, just like that.
This agreement is brokered by that same general, Yuan Shikai, who has essentially read the room, switched sides, and is now acting as prime minister, negotiating a deal between the dying imperial court and the Republicans in the South.
Right.
But I don't want to focus on the geopolitical ramifications right now. I want to focus on Puyi's memory of this day, because it perfectly encapsulates his total alienation from reality.
His recollection is perhaps the most surreal, primary account of a political collapse in modern history.
Truly, he is 6 years old. He remembers sitting on a raised platform, a kang, in a side room called the Mine Nature Palace.
Yeah.
To his right is Empress Dowager Longyu. She is holding a handkerchief and wiping tears from her eyes. Down in front of her, kneeling on a red cushion, is a fat old man that's Yuan Shikai. And Yuan has tears streaming down his face. He is snorting and weeping as he speaks to the empress.
Yeah.
And Puyi, the sovereign of this massive empire, is just sitting there on the platform, completely confused. He later wrote that he couldn't understand a single word the fat man was saying, and he had no idea why these two adults were crying.
The disconnect between the macro-historical event and the micro-reality of this child is just astounding.
It's wild.
The Qing dynasty, which had ruled since 1644, is legally dissolving. A tectonic shift in world governance is occurring in that room.
Right there in front of him.
And in the center of it is a little boy who only perceives a baffling emotional breakdown of the adults around him. He possesses no concept of what an empire is, therefore he lacks the capacity to understand that he has just lost one.
My analogy for this, it's like a hostile corporate takeover where the CEO is a 6-year-old playing with wooden blocks in the corner of the boardroom.
That's exactly it.
He is totally unaware that the company just went bankrupt, the stock is at zero, and all the assets are being liquidated. He's just watching the lawyers cry and wondering when he gets to eat lunch.
That captures the absurdity perfectly. But this is where the logistics of the abdication create a truly bizarre paradox.
How so?
Because normally, when a dynasty falls, the royal family is exiled, or frequently, they are executed to prevent them from becoming a rallying point for counter-revolutionary.
Right, I was going to push back on that. Why on earth did the newly formed republic let this boy live, let alone stay in the capital?
It comes down to the compromise, brokered by Yuan Shikai,
Okay.
to ensure a bloodless transition of power and to appease the remaining king loyalist forces who might have fought a brutal civil war. The republic drafted what were called the Articles of Favorable Treatment.
The Articles of Favorable Treatment.
Right. Under this legal document, Puyi abdicated his political power over China. However, he was allowed to retain his imperial title.
Wow.
And crucially, he was permitted to continue living inside the northern half of the Forbidden City.
So he loses the country, but he gets to keep the house.
He keeps the house, he keeps the massive staff of eunuchs, and he keeps the rituals.
That's insane.
The Republic essentially agreed to fund a miniature, powerless, make-believe empire inside those walls.
A make-believe empire.
Yeah. Outside, China is transitioning into a modern republic with presidents and parliaments. Inside the walls is still the 18th century, and Puyi is still treated as the son of heaven.
Which brings us to the psychological meat of this deep dive.
Oh, definitely.
What happens to a growing boy who is stripped of his real-world authority but retains his status as a living god inside a closed, highly artificial ecosystem?
It's a recipe for disaster.
The environment becomes this intense breeding ground for sadism and profound loneliness. If you want to design a laboratory experiment on how to raise a tyrant, you would build the Forbidden City.
The core ingredient of that experiment is absolute isolation from genuine affection.
Right.
According to the historical texts, after Puyi was taken on that midnight raid, he did not see his biological mother again for 7 years.
7 years without his mother? That's just, I can't even imagine.
Right.
Instead, he was forced into this bizarre, sterile, daily ritual. He had to visit 5 former imperial concubines of his predecessors.
Right.
He was instructed to call these women his mothers, and he had to formally report to them every morning on his progress.
Yeah.
He despised them, and they restricted him from seeing his real mother until he was 13.
Such a toxic dynamic.
The ringleader of this group of women was Empress Dowager Longyu, who, until her death, was the de facto ruler inside the palace.
Longyu wielded paramount authority over his daily life, and she was responsible for inflicting one of the most devastating emotional wounds Puyi ever suffered.
Which was?
When he was 8 years old, Long Yu decided to expel his wet nurse, Wang Lianshu, from the Forbidden City.
Oh,
Her
no.
official justification was that an 8-year-old emperor was far too old to still be breastfed.
But the sources make it explicitly clear that Wang was not just a food source.
No, not at all.
For Puyi, she was his entire emotional world. He stated that he had developed a deep, special bond with her, and that she was literally the only person in the entire palace who could control his temper or talk sense into him.
Yeah.
He hated Long Yu for banishing her. He later wrote a line in his autobiography that is just heartbreaking. He wrote, "Although I had many mothers, I never knew any motherly love."
The expulsion of wet nurse Wang is the turning point in his emotional development. We really have to look at what she represented to him.
Definitely.
In a palace filled with sycophants, eunuchs who bowed to the floor, and distant concubines who only cared about protocol, Wang was his sole source of empathy.
She treated him like a human.
Exactly. She was his only genuine, uncalculated human connection. When Long Yu forced her out, she severed the boy's last tie to common humanity. She removed his emotional anchor.
And look at the educational vacuum he is left in after she's gone. You would think the Emperor of China would receive the most rigorous, expansive education on earth.
You'd assume so.
But it was strictly, exclusively Confucian. He was taught to memorize ancient Chinese classics.
Right.
He later admitted that he learned no mathematics, no science, no modern history. He didn't even know where Peking, the very city he lived in, was located on a map of the world.
It is deliberate institutional blinding.
That's a good way to put it.
He is being aggressively educated to govern a mythic, ancient world that no longer exists, while being intentionally kept ignorant of the rapidly modernizing 20th century world that is right outside his gates.
And without the wet nurse to ground him, his daily behavior just spirals into something terrifying.
It gets really dark.
The adults surrounding him were remote and utterly unwilling to discipline a boy they considered divine. Everywhere he walked, grown men would drop to their knees in a ritual kowtow and press their foreheads to the stones, averting their eyes until he passed by.
Yeah.
He grew up with scarcely any memory of a time when his every whim wasn't completely indulged.
And it did not take long for a child in that environment to test the boundaries of his unchecked power.
No, of course not.
And he specifically tested it on the eunuchs.
Yeah, Edward Baer, the Anglo-French journalist who wrote extensively about Puyi, noted that because the emperor was considered divine, he literally could not be punished.
Right.
If he did something wrong, his tutors could only deferentially advise him against it. Baer gives the example that if Puyi chose to fire his airgun pellets at innocent eunuchs for fun, that was simply accepted as his divine prerogative.
Unbelievable.
And Puyi leaned into this darkness. He frequently had the eunuchs brutally beaten for the tiniest perceived transgressions. He enjoyed having them flogged. He would force them to eat dirt off the ground just to see if they would do it.
Puyi did not hide from this in his later writings either. He admitted it freely in his autobiography.
He did.
He wrote, "Flogging eunuchs was part of my daily routine. My cruelty and love of wielding power were already too firmly set for persuasion to have any effect on me."
There's one specific story in the sources that highlights just how deep this sociopathy ran. It's the story of the iron filings cake.
Oh yeah, that one is rough.
Puyi's watching a puppet show put on by one of the eunuchs. He enjoys the show, so he decides he wants to reward the eunuch.
Right.
He goes to the palace kitchens and orders the cooks to bake a special cake, but he commands them to mix jagged iron filings into the batter.
It's just so malicious.
When asked why, his reasoning was simply, "I want to see what he looks like when he eats it."
Wow.
It was only his wet nurse, Wang, this was right before she was expelled, who managed, with immense difficulty, to talk him out of feeding this man shredded metal.
If we analyze the psychology of this, we start to see parallels with historical figures like Caligula or Ivan the Terrible.
I can totally see that.
When a child realizes that his guardians will never, ever discipline him, he naturally escalates his behavior to see where the absolute limit of his power lies.
He's testing the fences.
Exactly. The profound tragedy of Puyi's upbringing is that cruelty became his only mechanism for agency.
How do you mean?
Think about his reality. He couldn't leave the palace walls. He couldn't choose his own friends. He couldn't even see his biological mother. He had zero control over his own destiny.
Right.
But he could control whether a man kneeling in front of him felt physical agony. He didn't see the eunuchs as human beings with internal lives. He saw them as interactive props designed to entertain him in his gilded cage.
That complete disconnection from standard human empathy is agonizingly clear when he finally reconnects with his own blood family.
Yeah, that reunion is so telling.
When Puyi is 13 years old, the rules are slightly relaxed, and he is finally allowed to meet his parents and his siblings again.
But it is not a warm, tearful reunion.
Far from it. When his family enters the room, they are required to kowtow before him while he sits elevated on the dragon throne. He had been separated from his mother for so long that he had completely forgotten what she looked like.
His younger brother, Puyi, gave a fascinating interview later in life about this dynamic.
Oh, what did he say?
Puyi explained that because of the immense oppressive awe surrounding the emperor, he had never once heard his own parents refer to Puyi as your elder brother.
Wow.
They only ever referred to him as the emperor.
Puyi actually admitted that before they met, he imagined Puyi as a venerable, mythical old man with a long white beard.
That's incredible.
He was entirely shocked to walk into the throne room and see a 13-year-old boy in yellow robes sitting solemnly on the chair.
I bet.
And even after this initial meeting, when the family was allowed to visit, the interactions were incredibly rare and completely stifled by rigid imperial etiquette.
They couldn't just hang out.
No, they couldn't just play or talk like siblings. The cousins and brothers brought a tiny, fleeting air of normality into the palace, but it was just a drop in the ocean of his isolation. His relationship with his parents remained cold and distant.
The normality couldn't take root because the environment enabling this bizarre existence was fundamentally toxic.
Right.
The entire ecosystem of the Forbidden City was deeply corrupted. To understand how Puyi lived day to day, we have to look closely at the underlying machinery of his captivity, the eunuch system and the household department.
Let's unpack the logistics of this golden cage. Because while Puyi thinks he is a god, the palace he is living in is essentially operating as a massive organized crime syndicate.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
He is living in virtual seclusion, surrounded by a massive staff of guards, servants, and most importantly, the eunuchs. Who exactly were these men, and how did they function within the palace?
The eunuchs are a fascinating and frankly tragic paradox of imperial Chinese history.
Okay.
Physiologically, these were men who had been castrated. Socially, they often came from the most impoverished, desperate families in the provinces.
So they didn't really have a choice.
For many starving families, voluntarily castrating a son was the only viable path to upward mobility because it allowed them to enter imperial service. Inside the palace, they were considered virtual slaves. They performed all the manual and administrative labor, cooking, gardening, cleaning, entertainment.
Right.
But because they were the only men allowed in the inner court, with the emperor and the concubines, they also managed the immense bureaucratic work of governing the palace logistics.
So you have a situation where the lowest, most marginalized rung of society structurally controls the daily life of the highest rung of society.
Exactly. They were subservient, they were routinely beaten by people like Puyi, but they also controlled the flow of information, the access to the emperor, and the inventory of the palace.
The inventory. That's where things get interesting.
Yeah. And because the system was so bloated and unsupervised following the abdication, the eunuchs were robbing the palace blind.
The scale of the theft detailed in the sources is staggering. The Forbidden City was a repository for centuries of priceless imperial treasures, jades, calligraphy, gold, pearls.
Endless wealth.
And the eunuchs were systematically smuggling these artifacts out of the heavily guarded gates and fencing them on the black market in Beijing. The sheer business of providing for the emperor's daily needs was a massive, coordinated grift.
Yeah.
And the bizarre juxtaposition is that while they are stealing his inheritance, they are also smothering him with excessive service.
Overwhelming service.
Puyi has absolutely zero privacy. The eunuchs open his doors for him, they dress him in the morning, they wash his hands, they even blow air into his soup to cool it down before he takes a bite.
His existence is a maddening mixture of extreme pampering and actual functional mistreatment.
Right.
He was forced to follow rigid, centuries-old protocols that dictated every minute of his day. He could never simply act like a child.
His meals are a perfect example of this absurdity.
Buffets.
Yeah. For every single meal, he was presented with a massive buffet containing dozens of elaborate dishes. But it was purely for show, to demonstrate imperial excess. He ate almost none of it.
Just a total waste.
Furthermore, every single day, he wore brand new clothes because tradition dictated that a Chinese emperor never reused an outfit. It is unbelievable, unchecked excess.
It is.
But as Puyi gets older, specifically after his wedding ceremony in 1922, he starts to mature slightly. He realizes that the adults around him are exploiting him, and he decides he wants to take real administrative control of his own home.
He begins to comprehend the sheer scale of the corruption. In his writings, he described the situation in the household department as an orgy of looting.
An orgy of looting. That paints a picture.
It wasn't just a few rogue eunuchs sneaking out with a jade cup. It was a systemic criminal enterprise involving everyone from the lowest sweepers to the highest aristocratic officials.
The sources note that by the end of his own wedding ceremony, the pearls and jade had been physically stolen right off the new empress's crown.
Right off her head.
Storage locks were being intentionally broken, and restricted areas of the palace were being completely ransacked. It's like finding out that the staff at the world's most exclusive, heavily guarded luxury hotel are systematically stealing the building itself, brick by brick, while the owner sleeps upstairs.
Yeah.
How do they smuggle massive amounts of treasure out of a walled fortress without the guards stopping them?
This highlights the ultimate irony of Puyi's life in the Forbidden City.
Okay.
He held the title of emperor, and he possessed the physical power to have a eunuch beaten in front of him. But he was arguably the most captive, ignorant person in the entire complex.
Because he didn't know how anything worked.
Exactly. He didn't know the market value of antiquities. He didn't know how the outside world's economy functioned. The eunuchs and the household department held the real, practical power over his logistics.
They were running the show.
They controlled the ledgers, they controlled the inventory lists, and they bribed the gate guards. The system was meticulously designed to keep the emperor's eyes focused on heavenly rituals and classical texts, so that he never bothered to look down at the accounting books.
But Puyi finally decides to look at the books.
He does.
He launches a plan to reform the household department. He recognizes that the traditional aristocratic Manchu officers are part of the corruption, so he decides to bring in severe outsiders to force accountability.
Right.
He appoints a strict loyalist named Zheng Zhaoxu as the new minister of the household department, and Zheng brings in a man named Tong Jixu to be his chief of staff.
Tong is an interesting choice.
Yeah, Tong is a former Air Force officer from the Beiyang Army. They are bringing in literal military efficiency to clean house. And as their first major move, Puyi orders a comprehensive inventory audit of one of the massive imperial warehouses.
And this audit is the spark that finally ignites the boiling tension in the palace.
Literally ignites.
Literally. On the night of June 27, 1923, just as this massive inventory is about to commence, a catastrophic fire breaks out in the complex.
Wow.
It rapidly spreads and completely destroys the entire area around the Palace of Established Happiness, turning countless irreplaceable antiquities to ash.
Puyi's immediate conclusion is arson, and it makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
The eunuchs knew the military audit was coming in the morning, and they knew it would reveal massive discrepancies in the vault.
Right.
So to cover their tracks, they just burned the entire warehouse to the ground.
It's a desperate move.
And the aftermath of the fire is what truly breaks Puyi's psychological safety. He overhears muttered conversations among the eunuchs in the courtyards that make him genuinely terrified for his own life.
Yeah, he realizes the danger.
He suddenly realizes that these men, whose entire criminal livelihoods he is threatening, might just assassinate him in his sleep to protect their racket.
It's a very real possibility.
So, about a month after the fire, he takes drastic, unprecedented action. Backed by troops from the Beiyang Army, he evicts the vast majority of the eunuchs from the Forbidden City entirely. He banishes them into the streets of Beijing.
If we look closely at the psychological impact of that 1923 fire, it represents the violent, terrifying shattering of Puyi's core illusion.
Right.
Up until the flames consumed the Palace of Established Happiness, despite the abdication, despite the Republic outside, the Forbidden City was an impenetrable bubble where he believed he was safe and supreme.
Yeah.
The fire was the exact moment. The physical reality of his decaying, corrupt empire violently encroached on him. The facade didn't just crack. It literally burned to the ground.
And the tragic irony is that his reform efforts, his one real proactive attempt to take agency and clean up his own home, they don't even matter in the long run.
Radical.
The political tides outside the walls are shifting again. Shortly after he kicks out the eunuchs, a warlord named Feng Yuxiang marches his army into Beijing, surrounds the palace, and forces Puyi out of the Forbidden City entirely.
Yeah, the bubble doesn't just burst. The emperor is formally evicted from it.
The sanctuary, as corrupted and traumatic as it was, is permanently gone.
It is over.
So as we wrap up part one of this deep dive, let's briefly recap the incredible, tragic trajectory we've explored today.
It's a lot to take in.
We started with a 2-year-old toddler Kidnapped from his nursery in the dead of night by a terrifying, dying empress.
Right.
We watched him physically forced onto a throne to rule an empire he couldn't comprehend, only to have that 268-year-old empire structurally collapse while he played with toys in a side room.
Yeah.
We saw him manipulated into a cruel, deeply isolated puppet, desperately longing for the one wet nurse who showed him affection, ruling over a corrupt, burning palace while being entirely disconnected from the reality of the 20th century outside his gates.
It is a devastating, almost unbelievable portrait of a mind forged in an environment of absolute artificiality, immense power, and deeply ingrained trauma.
Which leaves us with a lingering, deeply provocative question for you to mull over as we conclude.
Okay, what is it?
Puyi has now been forced, essentially at gunpoint, out of the only home he has ever known, the sprawling, insular golden cage of the Forbidden City.
Right.
If your entire identity, your very psychology, the fundamental bedrock of your reality, is built on the absolute certainty that you are a living God to be worshipped, what happens to your mind when you are suddenly thrown out onto the dirty, chaotic streets of a modern republic as a mere mortal?
It is a psychological precipice unlike any other in history.
We will explore exactly what happens when the god becomes immortal in part 2 of our deep dive into Puyi. Make sure you tune in.